The Living Ocean, Chapter 11, Oceanography. The organisms of the ocean are classified in different ways. Of course, there's the regular old kingdom, phylum, class, order, species. But then also, do they make their own food or do they eat other organisms? And then we can also classify organisms on, do they swim or do they not swim? Do they live up in the pelagic part of the sea or do they live on the seafloor in the benthic zone? So let's look at some of those differences. Marine biodiversity. There is a lot of biodiversity in the oceans. So if you look at like the hierarchy of organisms, starts with kingdoms and then comes down to species. The second row, kingdom, is kingdom and then phylum. Of the phylums, there are 28 different phyla represented in our ocean basins, where in the terrestrial environment, there's only 11. So the diversity is in the top there of the phylum. When you get down to the species level, though, there's only 15% of species in our ocean basins compared to 85% in the terrestrial environment. So there's more diversity in certain levels and less in others. So there's different ideas about why, and one of those is the intermediate disturbance hypothesis. And this reads, species diversity is maximized when ecological disturbance is neither very rare nor very frequent. The thing of it is that ocean basins, just by the nature of our stability of oceans and currents and temperatures and salinities and pHs, is pretty stable. That stability makes for less diversity. The stability, there's not a lot of disturbance. There's a lot of stability and not a lot of disturbance. And then if you think about it, because like most of the ocean is within a similar range of temperatures, a similar range of salinity, a similar range of pH, there's not a whole lot of difference in the deep ocean. In the surface, there's more diversity, but they are ideas that there's way more diversity than we found because we haven't explored all of the ocean basins to all of the depths. So there was a 10-year program called the Census of Marine Life to try to capture in more of those species. And they did catalog many new marine organisms, but there's many, many more to be discovered. Okay, so that first kind of distinction is the flow of energy. How do organisms get energy? Like, how do I get energy? How do plants get energy? Well, it's the same kind of thing in the ocean where we have autotrophs and heterotrophs. So an autotroph is going to be like a plant or phytoplankton that can make its own carbon-based life form out of what's available in the environment. So it takes in solar energy, the presence of water and carbon dioxide, and has inorganic nutrients. These are like the phosphorus, the nitrogen, the different fertilizers that lead to plant and the production of these sugars, this organic carbon CH2O. So that's the plants making themselves out of what's available in the environment. When they make that through photosynthesis or chemosynthesis, chemosynthesis would be instead of using the sun as the energy source, it's using more chemicals as the energy source. When those two things occur, either photosynthesis or chemosynthesis, the byproduct is going to be oxygen and organic carbon. So then animals and bacteria are heterotrophs, and they're going to consume the oxygen and eat the plants and make themselves, right? They're going to make their own organic carbon of their lives. When that happens, we release heat and water. Okay, and also we're breathing out carbon dioxide. Well, organisms in the ocean are doing the same thing. So we have autotrophs and heterotrophs. Woo! For a second there, I thought that was moving, but I don't think it is. All right, they're different groups of organisms. So we're basically splitting them here into plankton, nekton, and the benthic organisms. Plankton are organisms that cannot swim against a horizontal current. So currents are moving horizontally. They can't fight against the current horizontally. So this would be anything from these tiny little organisms in this image to a big jellyfish. Phytoplankton are photosynthetic. Zooplankton or heterotrophs are going to eat other stuff. And then bacterioplankton are bacteria. Those are single-celled organisms. The nekton, like the fish, whatever swimming against the current in the water column. And then benthic are the creepy crawlies, like crabs and worms and invertebrates that are stuck to or move around or live inside. Epifaunal, remember epifaunal, infaunal, vagrants, those terms, those are going to be living in the benthic zone. So we have the planktonic environment swimming around the water column, the benthic environment, and then we can further break those down by depth. Okay. So the pelagic zone is the water environment up in the water column. The benthic zone is on the sea floor. The sea floor is split up, or the pelagic zone, into oceanic, so beyond the continental shelf, and then neritic is over the continental shelf. All right, here's a good image. Let me turn my face off for a sec. All right, so first look at this little inset diagram. This is the benthic environment is along the sea floor. The pelagic is up in the water. So we'll go up here and look at the sublittoral, littoral, and supralittoral. Those are related to tides, and they are the area over the continental shelf and designated by whether it's in the high water zone, supralittoral, kind of littoral zone, like in the surf zone, and then sublittoral would be lower than low tide, so but still over the shelf. Once you get off the shelf, you're in the oceanic zone, and these epipelagic, mesopelagic, bathypelagic, abyssopelagic. If you've seen Finding Nemo, that was Mr. Ray's song. Those are all just associated with the depth of water in the pelagic zone. Over here, these terms, photic zone and aphotic zone, those represent light. So in the photic zone, photosynthesis can occur. There's enough light for photosynthesis. In the aphotic zone, there is not enough light for photosynthesis. Light. So euphotic is there at the top. There's enough light for photosynthesis. Dysphotic, there's still a little light, but not really enough for photosynthesis. In the aphotic zone, no light. So light disappears exponentially with depth. On the graph, there are two different lines. One line represents, like in that, the line, those chickens, I'm sorry, roosters. This line represents the fact that near the coastline, there's lots of terrigenous sediment coming off. And so that water, just by nature of that turgid sediment, is going to already start out more turbid, more particles floating in it. The clear ocean water is going to start out already less turbid, but then as it goes down, then it gets darker, 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 darker. Okay. Light. So light is going to change colors as we get deeper in into the water. We already talked about this, how when you get very deep, the water starts to look really red. Really beautiful blue water is occurring because the water is really pristine and clear, and the sea floor is white, and so you have that real crisp blue color of really clean water. All right, light. As I am superimposed on an anglerfish. I turn my face off. Okay, so organisms can play with this light thing. Here is a like a flounder, and It is camouflaged with the background here. Some of the founders can nestle down. Ooh, I just thought I was live here. I did this, nestle down into the sediment, and then they're really hard to tell that there's a flounder there. But then they also can kind of shade in with their background. This is the beautiful anglerfish. The anglerfish has the ditty hanging off its head that lights up, and organism like, ooh, pretty light. Oh, no, it doesn't eat it with that. The anglerfish is going to attack whatever prey came up to look at the pretty light. Jellyfish, they're, you almost sometimes can't see them in the water because they're kind of translucent. And so that's kind of a water thing. These organisms can also be bioluminescent. So the anglerfish and its glowing light that comes off the top of its head, that's bioluminescence. Bioluminescence is a chemical reaction in that organ of the organism. There's bioluminescence in the terrestrial environment as well, like with lightning bugs or fireflies, whatever you call them. So there's way more bioluminescence, though, in their ocean basins. And the bioluminescence, we're not always positive. You can't like ask an organism, why do you do that? But it can be for finding prey. It can be as like a warning signal. Like if you're bioluminescent and you see a predator, you may light up to show everybody else a predator. The lights also can scare away other organisms. So the bioluminescence has different uses for different organisms. Temperature. In the deep ocean, the temperature doesn't vary very much. It's like 30 to 40 degrees. But the sea surface temperature can be quite different. Like freezing cold, really high saline water can be way like below zero because it's so saline. And it can even get up to in the 80 some degrees in the warm tropics. So sea surface temperatures, there's a lot of variation. But at depth, most of the ocean is pretty constant. 90% of the ocean varies only about 1 degree Celsius to 4 degrees Celsius. There are different organisms that, or all the organisms in the ocean need to take this into account, right? So there are psychrophiles. These are psychedelic, no. They're crazy, no. They're just fish that are really cold tolerant, that crow in there. Extremophiles like the extreme heat that is related to mostly mid-ocean ridges and black smokers. Most of those are funny little shrimpy krill or weird worms that encase those black smokers. Most of the psychrophiles are going to be fish. Poikilothymns are, that's just a fancy word for cold-blooded organisms that can't really regulate their own body temperature. The opposite of that is homeotherms, which would be like us, mammals, and also birds that are warm-blooded. So that matters with the temperature in the sea. Salinity. Different organisms are going to maintain their life in different ways with the salinity. The example here in this diagram, the top one is a sea cucumber. Let's turn this off. The sea cucumber, squishy, and if you pick one up and squeeze it, water squirts out. The sea cucumber has a very similar salinity to the surrounding seawater, whereas a fish, most of the fish are going to bring in salty water through their mouths and through their gills, and then the salt will get excreted through the gills and maybe through urine. It pees out the salt. So it's all different. Osmosis allows water to move across cell membranes, so that happens within the organism. Buoyancy. This is all about staying afloat. I feel like I'm not very buoyant. When I get into the water, I feel like I just sink. I don't know. Everybody's different, right? These beautiful organisms here, diatoms, these are phytoplankton, copepods. Remember, those are the ones that move up and down. They have the daily migration. Crab larvae, shrimp larvae, fish larvae. They're all going to be kind of feathery looking, and that is so that they stay afloat. They are increasing their surface area and sending out little feathery appendages that move around, and that keeps them floating because if they didn't have those, they would just sink. Some of the, like this diatom, is going to have a gas bladder. Now, you'll see that also with different algal seaweeds and other mammals, like whales and dolphins. They have different bladders that they can open and close with air to stay more or less buoyant. Okay. Also fat. Fat in the mammals makes them float as well as keeps them warm. Dissolved gases. So at the sea surface, the phytoplankton are going to be taking in carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen. So the surface of the oceans are going to have way more oxygen than at depth. At depth, there's going to be more carbon dioxide. But thankfully, there are downwelling and upwelling events with different currents, maybe with wind blowing on or off the coastline, that can bring oxygen downwelling down to the depths, and then upwelling can bring nutrients up to the sea surface. Biological pump draws carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and sends it to the deep ocean as organic material, right? So we're taking in carbon dioxide and creating like the plankton that are then going to die and then fall to the sea floor, and it becomes a sink for carbon. Okay. The importance of size. So in the ocean, let me turn this off. Size and abundance are inversely related in the oceans. In every little bit of water, there are tons of little microbes in the ocean. So if you get water out of the ocean, look at it under the microscope, it's going to have tons of little bacteria and viruses in it, tiny little nanometer scale organisms. As we go up in size, there will be hundreds of a millimeter size microplankton, and then up to millimeter size zooplankton. They become less and less abundant. So the bacteria and the viruses are highly abundant, so are the microplankton, so are zooplankton. Then we get up into larger zooplankton like shrimp, for example, centimeter-sized organisms. We have less of those. And then get up to the large organisms like a giant blue whale. Those are the biggest animals on Earth. Those are going to be less abundant. So abundant is inversely related to size in the oceans.